Imu, Unlimited Blade Works, is slicing and dicing and crucifying all sorts of people left and right during chapter 1189. Luffy, doubly stabbed. Scopper, getting axed. It kind of feels pretty undeniable now. He is, in fact, the world. But what does that actually mean? And what's actually going on here with all these crazy powerful looking weapons that apparently are now confirmed to be the weapons of the 20 kings who founded what we now know as the world government? Well, don't you worry. Over the next 4 sections, we will cover all of that, going all the way from Nerona Imu and his crazy dark blades of the abyss to the true purpose of the Raja pirates. Yeah, it's gonna be a long journey today. So let's dig into almost everything that happens in chapter 1189 of One Piece, bearing all the Usopp stuff because I gotta save that one for my next video, which I hope you will be okay with. It's different from what I usually do, but that's for Tuesday. Let's get into it. So grab yourself some coffee or your beverage of choice and let's get into it. Right, so we learned during the reverie that there was an actual single king of the world ruling everything in secret. Then we found out through the reveals of Blackbeard and Zebek's goals to conquer the world that Mr. Imu here is said world, it seems. And since the God Valley flashback, Imu's true nature has become one of the biggest mysteries in the entire series. Is he a shadow? Is he a demon? Is he a parrot? Yes, I've been reading your comments. Is he Nika? I've been asking many of these questions over time, except the parrot one. That's a new one floating around. I put a poll out on my community page. Vote on that if you think it's worth a video. Anyways, every time I try to answer what Imu is, we just get new answers, but even more questions. What's going on with his body and those different forms that he has? What does the title King of the World actually entail? Because we can agree on one thing here, for sure. There's definitely way more going on here beneath the surface than we can see right now. Kingpin Mu isn't just simply the person sitting on the empty throne and the ruler of the world government, right? There has to be a reason for it. Out of the 20 founder kingdoms, he is the only one who ultimately ended up ruling everything, and I want to try and really unravel why that is with you today, because luckily I think that chapter 1189 may have finally started answering that very question for us. And I don't really think that Imu was pushed up to that role or kind of had to embrace it. Kind of starting to think that he was a sneaky beaky cheeky son of a beachy here, a man who used his mysterious Akuma no Mi powers to force his way to the top of the world by putting other people down, even if it maybe was their choice. And the reason that I've been starting to think that isn't really because of his dialogue that we get, it also isn't because of a 15th Elbaph flashback, it's because this dude apparently owns every damn powerful broken sword under the sun. I mean, seriously, homeboy looks like Moon Knight out here, the way that he's just chucking blades at every problem.
Run the bullshit, go!
Now, of course, it also means that we gotta take our handy-dandy magnifying glasses and really look between the pages, folds, and panels here for some hidden details, because all we actually see is Luffy getting stabbed, then stabbed again, but this time by the Sea God Sword, what by the way, and then Imu arms the Holy Knights with some other legendary relics, and then in the final moments of the chapter, my man, Scopper Gaban, makes an absolutely incredible entrance here to go axe to axe with the devil himself. Already legend just for that. So, why do I actually think that the swords and the stuff here actually matter so much? Aren't they just really cool weapons that Imu is using to show us how strong he is? Well, I don't think that's exactly right. It really seems like that he's crashed out on his subordinate kingdoms, because every single weapon that Imu is using did belong to one of the original 20 kings who founded the world government 800 years ago, which obviously is just super important, right? I think at least. They're not random mythical weapons with cool names that Oda's just throwing in for fun and for the vibes and the aesthetics. No, those are the very blades that led the war during the Void Century, that ended up winning the war and that ended up creating the modern, order of the One Piece world. These are relics of a bygone and technologically advanced ancient era one that's becoming increasingly important with each and every new chapter, especially here on Elbaph. And to be completely honest, this might be one of my favorite kinds of Oda reveals that he does. Like, we've been seeing many of these swords for so long, I thought we already knew their entire purpose, because they were obviously the blades placed inside the empty throne room in front of the empty throne to symbolize the fact that there is not this one true ruler. Something we ironically already knew was not the case at all. In my last chapter review, you might remember I actually talked about this being a possibility, but wasn't like super keen on the idea. And you know what? I was wrong to doubt it, and honestly, that's on me. I shoulda, woulda, and coulda done a little bit more soul searching and realized that this made a lot more sense, but also hindsight's 2020, and you know, this is fact now, but I felt like it wasn't that strong last week. But really, if you think about it, of course, these would be Imu's weapons. After we learned that Imu was the single person on the throne, I should have realized that these weapons weren't just pledged to each other, but pledged to him, the big contract guy, the guy who like makes bonds with anyone and everyone whether they want to or not. Probably, at least. Like, for all we know, Imu's also just this deceptive little freak and may have just tricked all of them into giving him their super weapons and their powers through like a promise of peace and collaboration. And I don't want to get all political on you because we all know that One Piece isn't political, but this actually would mirror a lot of real world like power struggles as well. Oftentimes when coups are used as a means of overthrowing a current government power, there's this like failed attempt at communism, for lack of a better term, as a system. Basically, an agreed upon alliance joins forces, destroys the current system in power, and then they're supposed to give up their status and just divide political power amongst many. But then of course that usually does not happen, and it's just a means for a new usurper to take the place. I mean, example, Napoleon. I feel like this could very well be exactly what Oda is playing at here, even though of course he's not interested in politics whatsoever. And seeing Imu use all the weapons of the other kings almost seems to point to exactly that idea. And now that we just know that these are just 100% the king's weapons, we can really finally begin to unravel them in true detail and try to figure out what they actually are. Like, of course, clearly, symbolically at least, they're just obviously important because after all, they are the weapons and the techniques used by the big bad of the series. But on top of that, I just feel like there has to be a ton of other significance for their names and their through lines, and hopefully that'll actually help us shape a little bit more of the Void Century and our understanding and ideas about it in the process too. Because if there's one thing that I've learned about One Piece in these many years that I've done this now, it's that in a one-on-one fight, always bet on Kaido, but if there's another thing that I've learned, it's that Oda's a little freaky boy when it comes to naming stuff. He's just unbelievably intentional with the references, the allusions, and purposes behind the names of many things. Attack names matter. Just take, for instance, the Bajrang gun, right? Referencing the Hindu monkey deity, or the Bagua attacks of Kaido, referring to the balance and the Buddhist cosmic balance of the world. Character names matter, like the thematic naming behind gold, silver, and copper in the Roger Pirates, reflecting their different rankings. Island names and even town names matter. I mean, we've got Dawn Island for Pete's sake, we've got Loketown. These things are very specific. Oda loves world history and he loves mythology, and you can best bet your soft butt that when it comes to naming weapons of all things, Oda is being crazy deliberate. Ancient weapons being named after the Greek and Roman gods, Zebek's blade being the eclipse blocking out the sun, Griffin and Cerberus, guardians of the heavens and the underworld. Yeah, baby, it's name time. So you can imagine that little old me wants to really dig deep into Imu's weapons name specifically, especially after our Holy Divine King suddenly just starts throwing around half a dozen blades named after legendary figures and gods and sacred relics from across our human history. No, of course I didn't think that this is random. I think that he's trying to tell us and tell Luffy something about the people who originally carried these blades, and that threat might actually help us unravel to help explain what actually was happening during the legendary Void Century conflict, and especially at the end of the Second World. And just to start somewhere, one standout detail to me: the names of all these weapons aren't famous because they're powerful. Instead, an incredibly strong through line between them is that they're named after characters and stories themed around judgment. Let's just start with Nemesis. Now, when people hear Nemesis, they usually think revenge. You know, some sort of, my Nemesis, I'll defeat your rival anime nonsense that ProZD would include in a short or something. But in reality, Nemesis is actually named after a goddess in Greek mythology. And Nemesis wasn't just the goddess of revenge, well, I mean, she was that too, but there's a little bit more to it here. She's a goddess of divine retribution. Her entire purpose hinges on restoring balance whenever someone became consumed by arrogance, pride, or excessive fortune. Basically, if someone believes themselves to be all-powerful and untouchable, Nemesis is there to humble them. If someone upset the natural order, Nemesis corrects it. That's why she's often depicted alongside the scales of justice. And to me, that's just a crazy fascinating choice on Oda's part, because I kind of feel like it's starting to imply that Imu isn't all about just pure conquest and domination. He's not asking you to stand ready for his arrival like a worm. No, he's instead enforcing a divine balance upon Luffy, Loki, and anyone in his path, invoking judgment on anyone who's gotten a little bit too, full of themselves. Pretty much exactly what we talked about with like the Saba-Odi parallel, where Luffy, kind of like in Thriller Bark, is just on top of everything, defeating everyone, strongest form I've ever been in, nothing can stop me type of vibe. And Nemesis is there to bring things back into balance. Now this also kind of makes me wonder if, like, from Imu's perspective, perhaps he isn't destroying rebels or naysayers, but instead punishing sinners. Right? Like, he's got a lot of strict verbiage that implies that he feels betrayed by figures in the past. He calls Nidhogg a traitor to Loki's face, and he very clearly has some very salty, heated rivalry beef with Joy Boy based on all the little flashbacks he's been having. I've also often been thinking about who punished Zunisha to walk the ocean forever for whatever their sin was, and that also feels like it might be connected to Imu too. And you feel? Like, why does he feel so offended by pretty much literally everyone during the Void Century? What happened then that made him, feel like this? Who hurt you, Mu? Who? Regardless, I think it kind of starts to explain a little bit about who Nerona Imu actually might be as a person. Something that all of his blades seem to double down on pretty heavily. He's a man thirsty for vengeance and retribution, and becoming the judge, jury, and executioner in his mission at the same time. If you want some more evidence, I got you, homie. I mean, let's keep moving through all these blade names. To me, my favorite one might just be the Blade of Vengeance, Stigma. Stigma is a societal term we use to talk about something that's disgraceful or taboo, but it's also arguably even more popular within Christianity, moving from Greek mythology to Christian mythology. I've already talked about this when the blade was first revealed, but the stigmata are the wounds suffered by Jesus Christ during the crucifixion, taking on, of course, all the sins of humankind. But they are the nail wounds in the hands and the feet, the injuries endured during his execution. And isn't it just a little bit coincidentally to think that Mr. Oda immediately gives us one of the most brutal images of Luffy being double impaled and, for all intents and purposes, crucified by Imu and his blades of judgment. But I also don't think that Oda just accidentally named two different weapons after Jesus' crucifixion and then literally just started reenacting it in this very chapter. That's right, I'm saying two: Stigma and now the Spear of Holy Command, Longinus. According to Christian tradition, Longinus was the Roman soldier who pierced Jesus' side with his spear during the crucifixion. That spear eventually became one of Christianity's most famous holy relics, often referred to as the Holy Lance or the Spear of Destiny. By the way, that's of course why Evangelion also used this name too, a fun little fact for you here. But I also find it incredibly interesting that this weapon is the blade proclaimed to Imu by the Rimu Shifu family. Kinda wonder if they were more involved in the battle against Joy Boy than some of the others maybe. Killing him seems like a fishman, or at least something weird based on his spiky teeth and stuff, so I've been wondering if his family is some sort of parallel to Judas within Joy Boy's original alliance, a group that rallied under Joy Boy, but then betrayed him and joined Imu, using the spear to cut him down, just like Jesus. But seriously, notice the themes already building here. Nemesis, Stigma, Longinus, it's all retribution, it's all religious punishment. Why is Imu doing this? Why does he know about history that led him to form or join a coalition of kings who were waging a holy war against Joy Boy? And maybe even the better question to me is, what does this reveal about Joy Boy himself? Was he dismantling order too much and people started rallying against him? Or was he actually low-key a little bit of a bad person too that warranted this divine rebalancing and war against him, kind of referencing back to what Vegapunk said, where he was like, both sides kinda sketchy. I don't know, there's just something that I can't really wrap my head around, and it's making my stomach hurt a little bit. Why does the most devilish looking character in One Piece, basically the devil himself, keep wielding weapons associated with handing out divine judgment and punishment? Is this irony on Oda's part? Or is this actually accurate and what Imu's doing? Let's see, maybe there's an answer that we can unravel as we delve into the other blades. For example, the Blade of Wrath, Gram. The weapon that I believe belongs to the original Shepherd family founder, since he's just been giving it to Summers. Now, Gram is one of the most famous weapons and swords in all of Scandinavian folklore. It's the weapon wielded by the hero Sigurd to slay the dragon, Big Daddy Fafnir, one of the defining moments of all of Norse mythology. Again, Greek, Christian, Norse mythology, you get the theme here, but Gram is also a key inspiration for the legendary blade Excalibur. Its origins tied to the Allfather Odin embedding a blade into a tree where only a worthy wielder would be able to pull it out. You see, that's why I originally thought that Gram would actually be the blade in the Elbaph tree, but obviously we now know it isn't, or at least the name is used for something else here. I still think, the sword in the Adam tree could still tie into this, but maybe in a different manner. Either way, Gram is a little bit of an oddball blade here because it's not fully about retribution, it's about a holy right to wield it. Only a chosen one by the heavens should be able to wield Gram, but Imu just can, and he does. And that to me feels awfully interesting. Now, obviously, just because the blade is named after Gram doesn't mean it actually follows the exact same rules as it does in the original mythology, but I still do wonder if there's something going on with that entire sort of "thou who art worthy" type of like Shakespearean thing that Imu is going on. There's also one of the newest blades, and the one that's getting my mouth and trousers wet completely, the Blade of the Sea God, Fragarak. Fragarak, I think. And quite frankly, this blade actually boggles my freaking mind because of the mythological implications that shape the entire One Piece world. We'll see if the official translation backs this up properly, but seeing a Sword of the Sea God does imply something massive that I've been debating for a while now. The Sea God and the Rain God are separate things, not one and the same. And that fact alone is absolutely huge to me in my entire God Piece agenda, right? Zaza, the Rain God, being a separate entity from a supposed Sea God opens up this whole new can of worms because I haven't been able to figure out if they were the same or differently. Like obviously in Skypiea, we first learned of the 4 gods, including a Rain God, but then the Harley text replaced the Rain God with a Sea God, and that really threw me off. Right, I thought it could have been a matter of perspective, the Skypians living above, the people on the ocean floor living below, but I'm kind of starting to think that both just existed and did completely separate things. Which then really makes me wonder if Fragrak is Imu's sword, right? He was one of the 20 kings. Is Imu the sea god, and that's why they use this blade to directly impale Luffy, the sun god? Maybe the name origins help here? In case you're curious, this one comes from Irish mythology, a new one, and it often is translated as the Answerer, having belonged to the sea god Mananan MacLear before eventually being wielded by the hero Luth. I'm trying, I don't know how to pronounce these Celtic names. Again, you can correct me in the comments. Anyways, according to Irish legend, anyone threatened by Fragarak was compelled to tell the truth. Now, Some stories even describe it as a blade that no armor could withstand and no lie could survive, which is pretty cool as hell by itself, but it also is right back to the main theme of all of Imu's swords because it is a sword associated with truth, justice, and authority, America style, I guess. But then comes the oddball, the big tummy mouth man, Xing Tian, and his axe making an appearance as well here. Xing Tian is a Chinese war god who is remembered for challenging the supreme deity and failing. He lost. He was beheaded actually, but in the most metal way possible. He did never give up. He refused death and broke his own body to just keep fighting. And I'm not making this up. His nipples became his eyes, something that happens to me when the room is too dark as well, actually, and then his mouth shifted to the area where his stomach was. And so without a head, he just continued swinging his axe forever, and I kind of respect the grind and hustle of Nipple Man. What throws me off though is that Xing Tian isn't the embodiment of authority, he's all about revenge and rebellion. So with this one specifically, I really wonder how Oda intends to just balance these themes present throughout all these weapons. They do seem closely aligned, but with some key nuance differences here and there. And I do wonder if they reflect the purposes or original roles of the different kings. But then we also have perhaps the hardest weapon to interpret altogether, Vohu. Now, I'll be upfront here, big dog. This is one of the ones I'm least confident about, right? All I know is that this blade is all about consumption and the void, which also makes me kind of wonder if this is Imu's personal sword as well, or like that one instead of the sea god one, because, you know, he's all about that hashtag void life. So you've got my sword one-on-one class done, congratulations. There's more to come, no question. There's at least 19 of them, of course, but why does all of this matter? All right, well, I think we can now shift and pivot away from the swords that we do know about to the swords that we don't know about, and more importantly, who used them originally to start unearthing some more stuff here. Maybe, I hope at least, I'm like excited to talk about this stuff, as you can imagine. Like diving into mythology is like kind of like what I live for at this point. So we now know that all of these weapons belong to the original 20 kings, the very people who marched against the ancient kingdom around 800 years ago and founded what would eventually become the current world government. We also know 19 of these royal families moved up to Maurizia, while the Nefertari family stayed behind on Alabasta. And then the story largely moved on. Outside of Imu and Lily's connection to that era, we hardly really know anything about it. But I'm kind of starting to think that Imu's weapons are potentially tied to something a little bit more than just the kings that wielded them, and that's gonna reveal some massive stuff about this Void Century era and the end of it specifically that we're starting to uncover now. I think that maybe, just maybe, the kings themselves might have been bigger than just regular old kings, because let's face it, weapons named after literal gods that belong to kings are a very interesting and special detail here. But we're also talking about these things in a series where weapons like Enma have a will of their own and their own innate abilities, where weapons like Ragnir have a literal soul and a devil fruit inside of them, where a giant blade sticking through the entire island is all that I can think about. I genuinely believe that there might be a much deeper, soul-themed and ability-themed connection between all of these blades, their wielders, and their name origins. In other words, I'm kind of starting to wonder, are these weapons just named after gods in One Piece? Are they simply called this because at some point the kings worshipped a sect of gods and the names of these blades are paying tribute to their divine status? I mean, due to some special power or the region that the king was from, right? We do know that there exist like islands with different world like mythologies and inspirations all across the world. Look at Alabasta and Egypt and Wano and Japan, and you get the idea, right? Or are all these blades named after the kings who wielded them, like Gram, Stigma, and Xing Tian? Are they like the names of these kings themselves named after the gods? I think that would be an absolutely crazy turn of events here, but there's definitely precedent, as we see with kings like Neptune in Fishman Island, another king named after a mythological god figure. But in my heart of hearts, I kinda start to think that it might be something even a little bit grander than that. I think there's a huge chance that the 20 kings just are these gods. 20 gods of varying power who rallied against the first pirate, the new sun god, greatest of all the gods, and waged a massive holy war against him, rebelling kind of like against the pantheon itself. This would be absolutely nuts, and obviously like contextualize and recontextualize a lot of the first and second worlds of the One Piece stuff that we've been learning about. Now, whether or not they were gods because of true divine power like Omen and Haki, or if they were named after gods because, you know, they were something like Enel, just so strong compared to those around them, I don't think it particularly matters here. It just starts to paint a new world image where all these ancient kingdoms, Alabasta, Dressrosa, and Wano, like were kingdoms founded by the gods of One Piece, are the real answer here. Where there's a reason why the celestial dragons see themselves as godly beings too, descendants of the original founding gods. I kind of love that idea. Like, this would be absolutely sick if it's true. I do hope it is to a certain degree. I love digging into this god stuff anyways. But the will of these kingdoms and weapons matching the kings who ruled them starts to open up like such a cool path for how Oda could tell the Void Century story overall. It would also, of course, explain the morally gray area that Vegapunk discussed again, right? There's no way to say that one faction is right or wrong when it's a battle between different divine wills. One part of the pantheon versus the other. Literal like Ragnarok, like the anime, right? Where the gods are fighting amongst themselves. And speaking of divine wills, by the way, I kind of gotta ask the biggest question of all. Are these kings literally like the swords inside them? Like, in this series, we do know that every sword, or at least powerful swords, to some degree has its own will or spirit. That's sort of the whole concept behind the voice of all things also, and like why Oda draws Zoro's swords as these three guys here, for example. But seeing as this is an arc where a weapon like Ragnir exists as well, I'm kinda left wondering if all these potential kings, Xing Tian, Gram, Stigma, Nemesis, are they literally the god kings themselves just sealed into these blades? It also raised some interesting questions about, say, Eclipse, which is of course the Beck sword we talked about earlier, who seems to have an ancestor who was a true king of the world. Whether that's true or not, we just don't know. So was the promise to have no king with the whole swords and the throne thing actually part of Imu's devil pact? Something used to seal them all away into their blades because in this genie monkey paw sort of way, they all agreed to have no single king, so all of these kings just became swords that now belong to Imu, the one person who did not actually partake in the deal, but just facilitated it. Or did maybe Imu just rule and guide this alliance so well that all these kings were willing to give up their souls to the cause and infuse themselves into these blades so that Imu could cut down Joy Boy? And then maybe they said, like, there is no true ruler because we're all ruling together, but, you know, they're all part of Imu now. Are they the eyes in the halo? I don't know. Like, I'll be honest, I don't really care which of these is true. I just hope that one of these options is true because all of them would be kind of gnarly. Imu literally wielding the 20 kings as his divine weapons, like the 20 demon swords or something, is like such a beautiful actualization of his role as king of the world, a world previously crafted by these kings that Imu has now dominion over, physically and spiritually. That'd be freaking awesome, right? Right? Or what if he is the combination of all their wills in one person? Again, like taking that idea from earlier, capable of wielding all these divine weapons because in some messed up way, Imu's will/consciousness is all 20 kings stuffed into one of these guys. And if so, it kind of makes you wonder, what other swords are rocking King Souls? Like, after he eventually gets back up, will Luffy finally be able to use that gigantic sword cutting through Elbaph and have his, like, King Arthur moment? Will it call to him in his death dreams, pushing him further? I mean, again, it kind of speaks to that role of, like Joy Boy having had a sword and a shield, or Nika having had a sword and a spear. It kind of feels like Luffy's gonna need one of these swords, or why else set up Imu the final villain of the story, or at least one of the major villains of the story, as a big swords guy, like unless Zoro's gonna find him, which feels unlikely. I personally would argue, but maybe you feel differently. Also, since the blades of the 20 kings belong to Imu, what's going on with that one single sword in the flower room? Was that Lily's sword? Not pledged at the base of the throne, therefore not capable of being summoned by Imu using his darkness sword pocket dimension shenanigans? Or is there a blade that's actually still fully missing? Maybe the one in the flower room is Imu's, and Vivi has no access to that sword somehow in some other way? Like, is that gonna come up? The fact that Lily betrayed or made like her mistake and didn't join the alliance there and didn't go up to Marijua? I really hope so. Like, I'd be absolutely sick if that ends up playing a role why Imu wants Vivi too. And I can absolutely see a world where a big piece of the entire endgame has been Imu trying to capture Vivi to either make her pledge Lily's sword to him, giving him that extra full 20 out of 20 divine power, or he's hunting her down to find that blade so he can finally take it. Also, all this talk of swords kind of also has me think that we've already seen a few more of the legendary blades that Imu might have, seeing as he bestows them to their rightful heirs, like killing him in Summers. I do wonder if Cerberus is a sword that was pledged to Imu by the original Figureland King. It would kind of explain that dark, fiery special ability thing that all these other swords seem to match. Each one of Imu's swords seems to do different things. I think that's something we haven't really talked about, but you know, it's not just that Imu is like, look at all these different cool swords I have, but they only cut. It feels like they all have abilities as well, right? Like, it seems like some can auto-lock on, growing to various sizes, absorbing the area around it. It kind of builds credit towards the idea that Cerberus could be one of these as well, just kind of borrowed out to like Shamrock, right? I don't really know though, because it kind of seems that the Holy Knights each have their own weapons too at first, and then get the Shower Wizard power boost when Imu decides that they aren't pulling their weight enough at this point. Thinking about it more also, I'm actually fairly surprised, like overall, just with how patient Imu has been with his Holy Knights here, given that they just immediately executed Saturn back on Eket Island, right? Like, they're really crazy relying on Imu's powers here, and he just keeps spoiling them with stuff. Very different vibe, like, than I expected after he again mind erased, shadow burned Saint Saturn's life energy after his failures on Eket. But alright, I do think that might just be enough sword stuff for one video. I still have plenty of the chapter to dig into. There's a lot of other stuff that happened, such as Luffy's still dead. Yay, like, finally time to lock in on Luffy getting absolutely skewered here as well, because relevant if it's the main character of the story. I actually hope I can go to the 7-Eleven in like 5 months and buy Luffy kebabs. That'd be kind of nice, and definitely something that Japan would do. Now, of course, you know what I'm gonna say here. On paper, this is just looking like Imu's trying to kill the man. Fair enough. It's probably the simplest explanation, and it's the one that the chapter itself presents to us. But bro, may I say that this scene to me is dripping, no, dare I say even oozing with symbolism. You could probably even convince me to go and say it's gushing at this point. Because, first off, Luffy isn't just stabbed. He's impaled and pinned against the Atom Tree. There's a very specific image that we've been talking about between Stigma and Longinus and the posing. These are all references tied directly to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And inflicting this on a character who's literally in Wano already died and come back as a god once before, kind of, doesn't seem like a big coincidence. And then Oda gives us imagery that like immediately evokes something being nailed to a secret tree while awaiting execution, waiting to be axed down by a weapon named after a warrior who tried to kill a supreme god. To me, this just seems like Imu crucifying Luffy and cutting the sun god, greatest of the gods, down once and for all. And to me, it also kind of suggests that the idea that Oda wants us thinking about sacrifice, death, and then perhaps what comes after as well, and better yet, is kind of the setting of Elbaph hinting at how this moment could actually be a massive boon for Luffy, not a bane. Really think about it. Luffy right now is pinned to the Atom Tree, right? And that means that we should probably be taking a look at its mythological origins, which is of course the World Tree Yggdrasil. We know this, we've been talking about this for years at this point. Specifically, there's a story about Odin and Yggdrasil that feels very apt right now here. In Norse mythology, Odin willingly hangs himself from Yggdrasil, pierced by his own spear, for 9 days and 9 nights. He isn't simply dying here, he's sacrificing and offering himself in the pursuit of knowledge. Then, when he finally descends from the tree, he's gained the wisdom of the runes and a much deeper understanding of the entire universe itself. In fact, this is exactly the way how he becomes the omniscient All-Father that we all know and love. I think we do, I don't know. Now, what if we, I don't know, crazy idea, compare that to where Luffy currently finds himself in the story too. Pinned to the Atom Tree, on the verge of death after being told that he needs more power to finally become Joy Boy. And seeing as Gear 5 and the entire Nika form already has a very distinct tie to death and the voice of all things anyways, this omniscient presence that Imu seems to also tap into with Omen, I kind of think that this moment could be exactly how Luffy gets stronger at Imu's hands. In this moment, on Death's doorstep, could the Atom Tree itself speak to Luffy and push him even further beyond? Let's kind of just face the hot and skinny details here. The Atom Tree is one of the oldest and most mysterious living beings in the entire One Piece universe. If anything in One Piece has stories to tell about Imu, the Void Century, the First World, and what came before, it's probably the tree that's existed through all of known and recorded history. Now, am I saying that this is definitely gonna happen, and if it doesn't, I'll be disappointed beyond anything? No. Of course not at all, but if Luffy is literally pinned to the Atom Tree while hovering between life and death, right? It wouldn't surprise me if that became the catalyst for another major voice of all things moments, especially because of Gear 5's already uber reliance on death as a trigger to awaken and make it stronger. Back during Wano, Luffy's awakening didn't simply happen because he trained hard and fought hard to take down Kaido. No, it happened after Kaido murked the man. Luffy's heart stopped. He was gone, and boom! Then is when the drums of liberation actually began beating, right? Now, whether Luffy truly died in a most medical sense is still kind of unclear. The story deliberately framed his awakening around the delicate threshold between life and death. There's spiritual area that allowed him to tap into the mighty full awakened power of his devil fruit. And now we have the second time that Luffy has been pushed to what appears to be the absolute brink while facing this overwhelmingly powerful opponent. Gear 5 is absolutely in this perfect sweet spot, I think, to go whole hog and unleash an even greater power right now, which finally brings me back to Mr. Mu here. Because if you've watched my previous videos, you will already know that I've been playing with a very controversial idea for a while now. Based on his clear obsession and relationship with the Joy Boy, maybe Imu doesn't actually want to prevent Joy Boy from returning at all. Otherwise, why not just, actually kill Luffy right now? He's kind of going easy on him. He's pinning him, restraining him, but he's not actually going for the kill. What if that's all he actually wants? He's yearning for the real Joy Boy, the full Nika power of the fruit to finally awaken. In this video here, I've proposed that Mu has spent 800 years trying to recreate the conditions that are necessarily that once existed already during the Void Century for this to happen, and after realizing and being very disappointed that Luffy wasn't ready quite yet, I'm kind of wondering if he's specifically killing him in a way to unleash that power that Joy Boy once held. I feel like that all this deliberate weapon use and almost ritualistic crucifixion, is that's the right word, might actually support the idea that this is all part of Imu's big plan. It's exactly what he's meaning to do. Now, to be clear, Chapter 1189 does not confirm that in any way. Imu could simply be just trying to execute the biggest threat to his rule and flexing on Luffy in the progress and doing the classic anime villain mistake of underestimating his big opponent and just letting him live even though he could have finished him, and then gets like pimp slapped in return after finding out that, ooh, I just ended up not finishing him and that made him stronger. Could be the case, but if Luffy walks away from this encounter stronger, wiser, or with just a deeper connection to the voice of all things and the One Piece universe overall, then this chapter might eventually look a lot less like a failed murder attempt by like a sloppy person who's supposed to be a god, and much more like an elite Joy Boy ally coup that just doesn't want to be found out to be doing something good here. Which of course will all sort of depend on how my man Scopper Gaban handles Imu in the one-on-one axe-off of the century. So many axes are flying around. It's kind of like a boys' locker room in high school, honestly. And finally seeing Scopper animated, boy, like, I cannot wait to see how the anime treats this epic panel of Scopper intercepting Imu. This moment feels just like already on paper here unbelievably powerful and awesome. A member of Roger's crew, for potentially the first time since God Valley, he is making a direct confrontation with the king of the world, not his holy knights, but Imu himself. And it's something that I think that the entire One Piece world has been waiting for. Remember the Vegapunk message that put the Roger Pirates business out in the open? They know the true history, and they aren't doing anything about it until now. And it's not just my man, it's the hockey man, Red Hair Shanks. Because we also received a mildly insane different lore dump in this chapter, which is that Shanks 100% just knows about Imu's existence, which, yes, feels very obvious when you really think about it and him spending time there and knowing how the marks work, but we did not know that for a fact until now. Like, we do know that he bailed on the true interaction with Imu and the advanced progression of his Abyssal Covenant to like a level 2. Shanks hasn't properly indicated that he actually knows about Imu until now, and better yet, Loki has now been confirmed to know exactly who Imu is thanks to that conversation that he had with Shanks. What happened to the big old enemy things? Are you telling me they were actually in cahoots this entire time? I think this is a pivotal moment in the series because it's showing us that the old guard is now finally ready to run it back, and admittedly, it's shaking up some of my personal understandings of some of these characters too. For example, who actually is stronger between Rayleigh and Scopper? Like, is it weird that I think that low-key it might be Scopper? Second off, how the hell has Shanks been allowed to move the way that he does by the government if he knows about Imu and seems to be acting against him very obviously? Is it literally just like, well, I mean, you're part of our holy blood, you're chill even if you step to me? Like, no. I don't think that's the case at all, because again, case in point, Imu butchered Saturn for making one little mistake that he didn't really have control over anyways. And you're now telling me that he hasn't done that to Garling, Shamrock, or Shanks himself, even though we had Mr. Red Hair's big betrayal of the Holy Knights? Or is there again something else to it, something more to it that we don't know? Does Imu know something that we don't about Shanks and his motives? Or again, is it that Imu just actually straight up wants Shanks to work against him and help Joy Boy in order to create the perfect awakening of Joy Boy once again? In classic Oda lore drop fashion, I just have way more new questions and cannot wait for them to be answered and get 100 million new questions out of it, especially because I just love the Roger Pirates and their grand scheme overall. I've truly got one real agenda in all my history of the many theories I've had. There have been many theories that I've been really enjoying and that I think have a good chance of coming true, but there's only one that I'm actually tied to. Bible Peace feels pretty strong. I'm here for it. The Bagua stuff, yeah, it works. I think it's cool, but I don't know about that one either, but if there is one theory, I'll actually put myself on the paper. You can put myself on the paper. One theory that I rock with, that's part of my headcanon and that I 100% believe. It's the idea that I've had for many years now that Roger has laid out this massive master plan for his entire crew to help create and bring about and guide the next Joy Boy. Rayleigh, Scopper, Crocus, Shanks, all of their actions, their placements across the Grand Line, their secret missions, and how they've all shaped Luffy and his crew and brought him to this moment, I do believe it's all been very deliberate, and that's the one hill I'm willing to die on. It's a plan that clearly was meant for his son that he kind of bred with another D-Clan member into existence for Ace, but then ended up by accident becoming Luffy's life, and it's all in order to bring about the next Joy Boy based on whatever crazy information Roger has discovered on Laugh Tale. Again, of course, probably tying into an even bigger plan by Joy Boy. Everything, including his own death, feels insanely intentional and calculated to me. And finally, we're gonna see if that's the case, because Shanks and Scopper are making waves now in ways that they never have before, and I am so crazily here for it. But as I just said, I do kind of wonder if it's actually just Roger's plan or if it was all originally part of this big 1,000-year Joy Boy plan. And if you want to know what that would entail, you can check out this video here where I break down Joy Boy's massive 1,000-year plan. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching. Thanks to our Patreons. This was a long chapter review, but boy, what a chapter. And we have a break next week anyways. A lot of cool stuff coming. Again, the Tuesday video, I'm a little bit nervous of putting out, but I hope you will still enjoy it, even though it's very different about this chapter. And I will see you in the next video. Oh, also let me know about the parrot theory, I guess. Bye.